It's the SKOR North Twins Show.
Indeed, it is the SKOR North Twins Show, recording this on Friday afternoon because our guy Declan Goff, whose pretty face you just saw right there, was at and the mustache is incredible right now. I won't even start on that. Was at a press conference at Target Field, sort of a season wrap-up press conference. I think originally it was going to involve Derek Falvey, president of baseball operations, and Rocco Baldelli, the manager. Rocco was not there today. I guess he was doing something else. And so Derek Falvey went at it solo. This all comes down, Dex, a couple days after the Twins eliminated all three of the people that were their hitting coaches. Yes. Assistant bench coach Tony Diaz was also fired. And then this morning it was officially announced that Thad Levine, who was the general manager of the team, has left the organization. As our own Patrick Royce told us, his contract expired. This is either a firing or a parting of ways, because who knows what. But anyway, tell us what you ascertained from the bowels of Target Field regarding team turmoil.
Ascertain and bowels, all in the same little setup there. I appreciate it, Judd. So my sense is, number one, that this wasn't a firing. This wasn't a dismissal either. This was a mutual parting of ways. And Thad Levine, Finster, do you have some Thad Levine thoughts? Thad Levine wants to pursue other things. And the biggest thing I think I gleaned from a lot of the, Derek can obviously ramble on a little bit, but the biggest thing I kind of gleaned from the presser was, I think, other people in the organization, in terms of the front office department, Jeremy Zoll, everyone else that's not just Falvey and Levine, because at first we know that these two were a package deal when they arrived in 2017 with Paul for those 2 seasons, and then they hired Rocco, and they've been here ever since for the last 8 years up until today with Thad. It felt to me like other people in the organization, other AGMs and people that they trust in those departments have kind of risen up. And I'm not saying they pushed Thad out of the room, but I don't know if Thad felt maybe as valued, maybe as wanting to do this forever in this position, being surrounded by a bunch of people who are also accomplishing the same thing as he is. Again, I'm not belittling, or I'm not looking at what Thad was doing as expendable by any means, but he also in at least Falvey's statement, he discussed that that Thad Levine wants to pursue other things outside of baseball. So I think my biggest thing, too, from this was, I don't know if they're going to replace this position. And if they replace this position, which maybe they technically have to, I think it comes internally. Now, they value external opinions. Of course they do. But the Twins organization, either went under Falvey or other previous regimes like Terry Ryan, et cetera, Bill Smith, they are a promote from within and disperse into another department type of industry and company, really. So if Thad Levine is to be replaced, my first gut is it's internal, and I don't know if an external hire would come in here. That's kind of my first big thought from this.
Well, and that probably saves you as well. Like if we're talking about, loss of, if we're potentially discussing the complete loss of a check from Diamond Sports Group, for instance, and a partial loss caused, a fairly big reduction in payroll, right? Then I guess, I'm sure Thad was not cheap. He probably was making a handsome, not a player, but a handsome salary. So, yeah, I got to think that the Twins are going to be looking for ways internally, also outside of the payroll, Declan, to trim. So that makes sense. And it is incredible that nobody really, unless you work for the Twins, and Royce's talked about this, but I don't think any of us really have an idea of like how many people that they employ as far as like the baseball stuff goes. So to your point, it probably makes perfect sense that if you think a couple of those people are very, trustworthy, have risen, that they could be candidates for promotion then, just based on the fact that I'm not sure they need to add more people unless they just want a different voice. And that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and a lot of these other, assistant general managers or people that are in, the inner circle of baseball operations, they handle so many different things. So, some guys might handle the negotiations with trade deadlines. Some guys might handle negotiations with certain agent. It's not just Derek Falvey having a power control and strangling the life out of each of those decision-making departments. Excuse me. So I just wonder if they are going to replace Thad, that I do think it comes from an internal person. That's just my hunch. And, I asked Derek about this too. I was just curious on his thoughts of Buster Posey getting the Giants job. A former player and respected, and I figured that Derek didn't really obviously have much of a relationship with someone like Buster. He never was around the Giants organization. And he kind of brought up this point of, he's obviously very excited for him and he envisions that he does a good job. But he mentioned how if Buster's running the president of baseball operations, how does he hire the rest of the people out? The same people that the Twins employ, these assistant general managers, and how many of them does he employ? Which ones attack certain things, as I just talked about with trades or negotiations with agents? So I was just kind of curious to get his thoughts on that as well. But I don't know if Thad Levine's job, if it does get replaced, it's internal, but it doesn't seem like they're in a rush either to start interviewing external candidates to replace Thad's position.
It feels like Thad, to what you said a little bit before, too, it feels like Thad, like the first 2 years, Thad was a spokesman. I mean, Derek has always been okay in front of a mic, but I don't think that for a couple of years he was truly comfortable, and Thad could do a stand-up act. He's got that personality.
Yeah.
And so, the first 2 years, it was a very front-facing job. It felt like after that, Derek began to take the front-facing stuff a little bit more, but Thad was still important. The last couple of years, you see Thad, but it hasn't been the same. So, it does make sense that probably some of the workflow and distribution has changed there. What did Derek say about the decision to blow out the 3 hitting coaches, and also Diaz, who told the Star Tribune that there's going to be a new infield philosophy? I'm just curious, because this team collapsed, so changes were inevitable, but how did we land on those 4 people?
Yeah. And just really quickly, too, last thing on Levine before I get into that stuff, too. Falvey made it very clear, this does have nothing to do with the 6 weeks, and they have been talking about this exit because Thad's contract was running out at the end of October. So this has been a conversation with him and Derek for the last year. So that could be lip service. I don't buy that as lip service. I think Thad wanted out. I generally think Thad wanted out regardless if this team was playing in the ALDS today, Judd. I don't think that was the case.
Okay.
On the infield philosophy, that was coined from Diaz. So we actually were able to talk with Rocco over a phone interview. Rocco wasn't present, but we were able to chat with Rocco because Falvey kind of deferred that comment and those type of ideas to Rocco, who will be kind of searching for that person. And the thing that I got, and again, Rocco didn't really want to be talking so frontal and so early after, guys that he was employing and friends with that have been gone for 4 days, but this is your business. I agree with you, Judd.
Right.
That's the bed you're in. But he wanted, I think he wants an infield coordinator who can be a little bit more versatile at teaching these guys how to play different positions, is kind of like what I gathered from it. It might have been a buzzword from Diaz and just a very easy way to frame we're replacing you. We're going to replace you with a different philosophy.
Right.
And I don't really still know what they're looking at. And also, it feels like if they are to get a new infield coach, that could still, again, come from the internal coaching side, right? This isn't just going on the street and finding some new guy to hit ground balls. They could take an assistant bench coach, right, and move him as the infield coach. They could take, it wouldn't be Jace Tingler, but theoretically, Jace Tingler could become the new also bench coach and assistant infield coach. It felt like a buzzword they used to move on from Diaz, and I don't really know what they are trying to accomplish with infield philosophy. I know Phil Miller
guys
was
around a lot. I wonder, are they saying that Diaz should have got Royce to buy into the move to second or something?
That's what I was trying to
I'm very confused by this.
That's what I was trying to parse through with the comments of it. It felt like, are you trying to hire someone who's going to be better at explaining other positions, i.e. the Royce Lewis moving to second base thing? Right. Because Carlos is playing shortstop. Either he's not playing or he's playing short.
Correct. Like Brooks Lee played second and short and third.
Yeah, Brooks Lee profiles probably as a prototypical third baseman, but is his best spot second base. Royce, I think there's a lot of things, and maybe that person, their bigger job, whoever the infielder coordinator is to work with Royce. Trevor Plouffe has talked about that a lot with his throwing motion and whatnot too. So there could be a little bit of that in there. They haven't started that interview process, by the way, for external people. They're kind of going through their offseason checklist. The coaches that have been retained and have not been released are the ones that are coming back here. So the Jace Tinglers, the Pete Mackeys, obviously Rocco, like those guys are
Tommy
returning.
Watkins at third.
Tommy Watkins, I would believe, at third. Yep. I don't think any other coaching, they made that clear, any other coaching changes are done with.
Okay.
On the hitting coach side,
yeah.
Two things. I asked Falvey about, Correa talked a lot about Popkins and how much he was his, I think even on the record, like his favorite hitting coach and hitting coach that have maximized his game. And, he came from an Astros organization and has had a lot of different hitting coaches. But is he involved in that process, right? Just like Correa being involved in the trade deadline ideas. I wanted to ask Falvey about that. And he said, of course, someone like Carlos's pedigree is, involved and has influence in who we hire. Now, I don't know if like Correa's in the Zoom room or obviously flying back here to Minnesota to meet with the next hitting coach with Derek. In fact, I can probably guarantee you that he's not. But I wanted to know if Correa's influence still kind of holds some merit with the same type of things he talked about at the trade deadline, which for him were finding the right hitting coach. And Falvey made it seem like, yes, he is involved. And of course, we want someone who is involved that can elevate everyone outside of Carlos. Carlos is a great hitter. Can he get through to Royce Lewis? Can he get through to Brooks Lee? Can he get through to some other guys? I will say, I think the biggest thing philosophy-wise they're looking for, and Derek touched on this as well, is they need a better philosophy hitting-wise with runners in scoring position, which I know probably a lot of fans are saying preach and no bleep, but Judd, we saw those at-bats with runners in scoring position down the last 6 weeks. We saw in the first 3 weeks. And congratulations that you had a really good offense for about 50% of the season.
Yeah.
But man, on the bookends of that were two of also the worst offenses. So can you find, I think you'd much rather be more consistent and just be right above average in all three phases of those seasons at hitting. It's not going to happen because it's baseball, but they want to find a hitting coach that has different philosophies on how to approach runners in scoring position, clutch situations, not just, starting up there with no one on base. I think they want someone that can help maximize those areas.
So how do you think that the franchise, but especially Baldelli, he had, there was at least 2, if not 3 times, including right at the end there, when he criticized the hitters, not every one of them, but basically said, we have a good plan here. They're not executing it. So then they turn around and fire the guys that came up with the plan. Like, I guess, and I don't expect you to have the concrete answer, but I guess my thought process is you were defending them and then they all get fired. So who's at fault here? I'm a little bit confused as to what the message was then.
I'm guessing because they, as much as the Twins didn't have the right horses in their pitching staff, I don't think Pete Mackey could take a fall for what took place this year. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if he did, but my point is it was definitely more of the situational hitting and the hitting overall that doomed the Twins more than the pitching. That's how I looked at the last 6 weeks.
And the bullpen, which is more on Falvey's construction than Mackey's pitching coach job.
Correct. So I think they looked at the philosophy, and even though they still finished, 10th in runs scored because of how good they were in the middle chunk of the season, there was too much inconsistency from the first 3 weeks of the year where they couldn't hit anything, and the last 6 weeks where they literally let the biggest team collapse happen. And it feels like the biggest area they felt they could change is their hitting philosophy. And explaining that there was some type of word that really stuck with me about explaining the process of how they went about things, not just a Correa who can take that info and dissect it. Conversely, like Pablo can take all this information that I've asked behind the scenes about a lot and spin it and take the information that he needs to use to his advantage and utilize it and execute it. I feel like a lot of the stuff that Popkins and the staff tried to execute maybe didn't go over in everyone's head correctly in the right ways collectively. So can they find a hitting coach that can explain those tendencies and those type of things you should be looking at in a more explainable way? I mean, baseball players are creatures of habit, and especially ones that have good pedigree, like Royce Lewis and Brooks Lee, who are top overall picks and have dominated every step of of minor leagues until they get to the majors, and then book comes out on them. How do you adjust? How do you counterpunch to not end up with your career in the toilet after just having a hot start? So I think they're looking for a hitting coach that can explain those tendencies in a more conversational or more appropriate way that makes sense to everyone and not just the ones that maybe want to take it and utilize it how they want to utilize it, if that makes sense.
It's so intriguing too, because like the message again at the end of the year was that the young guys sort of have to grow up and have to be more serious, blah, blah, blah. And now it feels like they're saying, well, yeah, but we didn't exactly weaponize them correctly to go. So like, it feels like they're searching for what went wrong. And the narrative that we got as the season came to a close has now been like, okay, the coaching wasn't as good. Our plan wasn't as good as I said it was. So the young guys are still at fault, but they're not as much at fault. What's your sense on this? Do you think, and I mean, I know it's just Derek and he's president of baseball operations, so he is like strictly the ball guy. He doesn't have much to do with the business. But do you sense from him that there is any type of an idea of the trouble that they're in, like with the public or the feeling about this meltdown? I guess when they said, Dex, at the end of the season on Sunday, that it was 6 weeks, terrible weeks, but we're not going to judge on that. I felt like that was almost trying to say, but it was only 6 weeks. And to your point from before, you're right. They had a terrible start. In fact, I would have fired Popkins then, but they had a terrible start. It wasn't just 6 weeks, and there's a lot of problems here. Now, the last thing for me is I will say this too. They have a good farm system. Like they've got guys coming up. So this is not a complete lost cause. I just feel like the moment in time that we're in right now going into spring training does not exactly feel like a conducive atmosphere to success for anyone, including a bunch of young guys who seem to leave the clubhouse pretty frustrated by their predicament.
It's a good question, Judd, as Falvey likes to say also. It's a good question.
I mean, it's in depth, but it's really to me, it's the root of the issue, because if you capitalize on what you do have, I think you can be okay. But you got to realize that.
I'm not being a GM or a president of baseball operations where I'm dodging your question, but let me answer your question with something I took away that was very interesting. So when asked about the hitting philosophy, and I believe it was, I don't know if it was Jim Rich or someone asked about the Miami extra inning game. That was 12, 13 innings where guys weren't running out balls. People were in the wrong spot. Just fundamental baseball. You and I watched that, and we would be tortured having to watch that baseball game again if you and I would be forced to watch that.
My eyes bled.
And, Falvey brought up that game, and then obviously the Red Sox game just 5 days prior, which was almost the same type of game, where they started to realize, I don't know if we have the right type of, not leadership, but philosophies in place here. Because they looked at the Boston win as, all right, this has sucked, and this is our turning point. That was what the players felt. That was what coaches felt. That's what Falvey thought too, of this is the jumping off point. We have 9 games to go. Now that sucked, but we battled and you won the game at the end. It's win losses, right? But that obviously didn't work. They won one more game the rest of the way after that win in Boston, I think, last Friday. So I think if you were to like highlight or put under a microscope games that they realize changes have to be made, it's probably those two, especially the Boston-Miami game. But to answer your question of the perception of, are they aware of the problems that have taken place and how their perception is at an all-time low with fans, I think they're oblivious to that.
Wow.
That's my sense. I believe that they are oblivious to that.
So in light of what you just said, which is super intriguing, what do you think got Rocco off the hook? Because, a lot of what you just said, if that's how they felt, that reflects on
absolutely
Rocco in a huge way.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, like, got him absolved?
I think Derek really likes Rocco. I think Derek and Rocco, and keep in mind, and Rocco talked this on the phone today. I mean, Falvey and Levine, now the departed Thad Levine, were here for 2 years before Rocco got here. So it wasn't like all three of these guys came in as a tripod together,
Right.
linked at the hip.
Right.
But I think they like Rocco's philosophy, and they probably like Rocco's willingness to hear and take information and go from there. I think Paul did actually a better job than he was given credit for when it came to Thad and Derek trying to work with him to understand. And I think it's a big misconception with Paul's tenure. But I think with Rocco, they probably don't want to start fresh. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's why.
Yes. Yeah. I'm asking you to recklessly speculate. I don't think that. I just think it's interesting that they're holding some people accountable, but the guy who ultimately, like, it's pretty damning to think that Sox game was, okay, this is it. And then to your point, you win like one more game. And you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, that Marlins game, I don't think I'm going too far by saying that was disgusting.
Yeah, that was
like, that was a disgusting event to have to watch. So
yep.
I just think it's an intriguing thing. And like, what we don't know still, and we just won't because they're not going to tell us, is how much Rocco does what they want. So you're not going to fire a guy if you are necessarily at fault. Like if you're dictating moves and those moves blow up, you're not going to raise your hand if you're Falvey and say, well, guess what? Those were my moves. So it's just an interesting thing. And I was curious. Okay. What else came of this thing today?
They basically, it was asked what, off-season checklist, so they've evaluated their coaching staff. They're now in the process of looking for, a hitting coaches, a new infield philosophy coordinator. They're going to start doing that process. And then I think, obviously, because you can't, baseball, for it's not like these teams can start negotiating. You got playoffs that are just starting. We're still, I don't even know, probably mid-November when, and to put in NFL terms, when legal tampering stuff can start. I don't know if it's that's immediately after the World Series.
I think. It's like 5 to 7 days. And I mean, then it's still slow as hell.
Yes, it is. It's not what it used to be. That's for sure.
It's not.
But they're going to evaluate and start interviewing people, and I think when asked too, like, what are you looking for then? Like, outside of the situational stuff that I told you about, which I think also is very important. Find a guy that has much better approach or much better way of conveying situational hitting. They're just in the complete kind of early interview applicant stage. I wouldn't even call it interview, applicant stage, where they're probably writing some guys' names down on a list, figuring out who to target, who to go after, who to talk to, who's worth talking to. I don't envision them hiring a new hitting coach next week. I don't know what the timeline exactly is on that.
And do we need 3 again? Can we get
by with 2? I don't know if we need
2?
3.
Can we get
maybe.
by with 2?
Maybe.
Hitting coach, assistant.
What are your thoughts on, because I keep seeing this one pop up in mentions and around, what are your thoughts on Nelson Cruz being this team's hitting coach? I know he's in a very special advisor role right now with Major League Baseball. I don't know if he has any interest in coming back to the coaching ranks and just that side of baseball.
And he's so rich.
He's rich. He doesn't need this job.
Right,
he doesn't need this job.
My thoughts are this. Intrigued.
Yeah.
Intrigued. He's really good with players. He is as impressive of leader of a clubhouse or locker room as I think I have seen. Like, I mean, Correa is good, but Nelson Cruz in 19 owned that room, and everything sort of went through him and gravitated, and his presence, again, it's an it factor thing. His presence was absolutely huge. I would, if he wanted to be on my coaching staff, I ain't saying no. Now, it depends on, like, philosophically, are the Twins going to decide what they want now, what they didn't have before? Are they going to go a little bit more towards, dare I say it, small ball, like the Brewers play? Are they going to try to get guys on and steal bases more? They've definitely gone a little bit away from the 2019, it's a Bomba or nothing. So I guess that would be my question, but very intrigued if Nelson Cruz wants to be on my coaching staff.
Here's something I did glean that was very interesting. So the veterans and the ones that were brought in here, like the Carlos Santanas, the Manuel Margot's, Kyle Farmer, who was a holdover from the year before, if they are to add, and by the way, I don't know what they can add. I mean, if you look at their payroll situation and you count for arbitration, like they're going to be right at the number they were last year. That's the word.
Same. Okay.
That's the word.
So it didn't get addressed on the record today then?
No.
Okay.
But if they are to get veterans, like I wonder, because like Carlos Santana is a lead by example guy and also a little, at least to me, I know, and he had a big blow up right in Pittsburgh where people were playing Fortnite and he like broke a TV because people were playing video games during games, which is unacceptable.
Philly.
So good. Philly, as the Phillies, did that.
Yep.
And Manuel Margot was also really quiet. Kyle Farmer, I think, did a decent job at that. But if they are to pursue veteran free agents, I wonder if some of those ones are guys that are better at forward leaning into leading by example, how to show a rookie, how to show a younger, inexperienced player how to approach things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, because I don't think Carlos Santana. In fact, Carlos Santana was a success here. It was a success.
Well,
I'm not gonna call it a great success.
The beginning and end were terrible. The middle was great.
But his glove definitely was really a lot better than we thought. Overall, for what the Twins got from $5 million out of Carlos Santana, it exceeded the expectation. I think that's fair to say.
Right.
But can they find, if they are to add veterans or trade for veterans too, I should say, are those guys that are they looking also at guys that are better at conveying those type of messages to younger players? I think that's also not on their short list, but on, again, their offseason checklist of who do we add externally from this roster and what do they bring? Because the last thing you want is another 2018, hey, we got Lomo's available, Lance Lynn's available, Addison Reed's available. And you throw your money at them and add them, but then you realize they're a-holes. Yeah. So they have to, I think, kind of look at that as well as what veteran players are better at and making that clubhouse a little bit better.
And to your point, too, if you are going to make trades, what do you trade? 40-man roster guys, your guys, prospects. And then I also have questions about this. It feels like they've become, and this is not a bad thing, so I will actually compliment them. It feels like they've become more open to expediting the journey through the minor leagues quicker. So, because if it felt like at first, like it was like, we're not going to see Royce until, 2022 or something like that, right? Or 3. But it feels like with Brooks Lee, they definitely said, this guy's doing really well. Let's move him. So my question is, and this I'm sure did not come up, but a guy like Walker Jenkins, who got expedited pretty quickly up to what? High class A? So, is that a guy who could see the big leagues if he continues on that track next year at some point? So, there's a lot of interesting things here because some of their philosophies I hate, but some of them they have changed a bit. Yeah. And the hitting one I'm super curious about because, are they at the end of the day, do they want hitting coaches who can get the message through and now they're basically saying that these guys didn't, or are they really going to just say we're also, we're seeing what the Brewers are doing, we're seeing what teams are doing, and we want more of that. So a lot of intriguing things. Unfortunately, we could talk about this till we're blue in the face. I don't think it gets the fans back.
No, it does not. It's just gonna be like a long road of not even spring. I don't think spring training will get people excited. I don't think opening day. It's always a good crowd, but
right. And it's springtime, and there's an excitement. Yeah. But what's the crowd for game 2, home game 2?
Oh yeah, it's probably small.
And that's the question mark. But that's where I guess your answer that doesn't scare me the most, but it's the most wow, is that you don't think that they have an idea of how bad things are. And I don't care. I know that Derek's not in charge of the business, but everyone is affected if people become apathetic to your product.
Maybe the better word is not, I don't think that they're not aware. I don't think they care.
That's even worse.
But
worse.
They have to be aware. Of course they're aware.
But that's incredible. But if they don't care, that means that's so incredibly condescending that would make me check out even more so.
And I'm not, and they probably don't. They don't look at it like we're not going to make emotional decisions because our fans want us to make emotional decisions too.
Right.
But it's legitimately going to take, unless some big type of surprise thing happens here.
Right.
With like a big signing or acquisition, which again, I don't see happening. If this team in mid-July next year is the same amount of games over 500 as they were last year,
Yep.
like it's going to take a lot of a lot of things to happen for Minnesota sports fans to buy back into this team. It's just going to be a crawl.
If they're not available in a mass sense on TV, I think it's a losing cause. Like Dex, this team was playing great. You're right. June, July, right? Like they're heating up. And the most fun I had at games were the Brewers, the Cardinals, the Blue Jays. Why? Because fans from that were, lining behind the visiting dugout. And to your point, the Cleveland, when they swept Cleveland on that Friday, that was fun as well. But that was like a one-off. So I don't think winning cures this. I think you have to win and have your games be available. And in my opinion, that's just not on cable or satellite. That's on streaming. I mean, this is going to be a slow road back. You're not going to get this all back at one time. But there are moves that if you don't make, you're not going to get it back until you do make those moves. Right. And the last thing is, I agree with, you don't make change for the sake of change, but I will say this, and here's my question it's more of a rhetorical one. Who's watching Falvey? And by that, I mean, if indeed he has as much influence on game day as has been talked about, to me, that's where somebody has to be like, okay, we got to look at you. And that doesn't mean you're going to lose your job. And it doesn't mean that you have built a prospect pool. Awesome. That's good. You've got good, like all employees, like us, we got good traits and bad traits. And we ordinarily either self-steer away from our bad traits or somebody does it for us, right? So, like, if Falvey indeed is keeping Rocco because Rocco listens to Derek, that end of the season was, in my opinion, as bad as the players were at times. It was mismanagement 101. Yeah. So that's where if you had an ownership group that understood the game or cared about it, they would be like, okay, we need to look at this. And we're not saying that we're going to do it. Like, we're not going to step in and say, here's what we should have done. But we are going to step in and say, we don't want you to be influencing things because the way that you did blew up in everyone's face. It's either going to be Rocco or we're going to blow him out and get a guy, Terry Francona, who knows how to manage the game himself without, essentially bumpers being set up. So that's what concerns me. I'm not even calling for like, just change it because it didn't work. I'm saying if things work the way that we think, I'm a little bit concerned. The pitching decisions, which by the way, weren't the pitchers' faults. Some of those pitching decisions were awful.
Yep.
So that's my point. And it just feels like, everybody's everyone who survived is friends, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Joe's like, Derek's coming back, and Derek's like, Rocco's coming back, and that's like, let's all get on the school bus. Can't wait for school to start next year. It's like, boys, that's not how pro sports works. But anyway, I digress. Good stuff. Tell the people where they can get more of this just top-notch Twins conversation, Declan.
Yeah, hit the like button, subscribe button here on the SKOR North Twins Show YouTube channel. 5-star rating and a review would be great on the podcast side. Apple, Spotify, appreciate that as well. We'll still be pumping out plenty of off-season content, so anytime there is
still a baseball
new infield coordinator guy hired, we'll be here to break that down. So
framing.
The hot
Framing
stove
coach
might not be that hot, but the SKOR North Twins Show will certainly be. That's Judd Framing. I'm Declan Goff. We'll have Mackie 2 back in tow on Monday. Appreciate you guys. Hit the like button, subscribe button. Appreciate everyone supporting the SKOR North Twins Show.